Just now, a shocking development inside the royal family has sent waves of disbelief across Britain and far beyond. Sources claim Meghan was left physically overwhelmed after King Charles finally allowed the truth to surface, a truth that, until now, had been carefully buried beneath silence, protocol, and strategic restraint. What unfolded was not a public confrontation, nor a dramatic press statement, but something far more unsettling, a quiet exposure that struck at the very core of royal trust. According to insiders, this revelation was not sudden. It was the result of months, perhaps years, of withheld information, internal reviews, and private confirmations that slowly built toward an unavoidable moment. When King Charles chose to act, it was not driven by emotion, but by duty. And that decision, sources say, changed everything. Witnesses describe Meghan as visibly shaken after learning that certain narratives she relied upon could no longer be sustained within royal circles. The weight of the moment reportedly became too much, forcing an abrupt pause in proceedings that no one inside the palace anticipated. This was not theater, this was consequence. What makes this moment especially explosive is not what was said publicly, but what was acknowledged privately. The palace, long accused of silence, is now responding in a way that suggests boundaries have been crossed and patience exhausted. And while no official accusation has been announced, the implications are impossible to ignore. As whispers grow louder and timelines begin to shift, one question dominates every conversation behind closed doors. Was this collapse the result of pressure, or the realization that the truth can no longer be controlled? And this, insiders say, is only the beginning. What unfolded behind palace walls was not impulsive, nor emotional in its execution. According to insiders, King Charles' decision to allow long-suppressed truths to surface followed months of internal pressure, quiet verification, and deeply uncomfortable confirmations. This was not a reaction to headlines or public sentiment. It was the result of accumulated evidence, private briefings, and a growing belief that silence itself had become a liability. Sources close to the palace suggest that concerns had been raised long before this moment. Certain inconsistencies, private representations, and behind-the-scenes narratives had quietly drawn attention from senior aides tasked with protecting the integrity of the crown. At first, these concerns were treated cautiously, handled discreetly, and contained within a small circle. The priority was stability. The priority was restraint. But as time passed, the cost of maintaining that restraint began to outweigh its benefit. King Charles, known for his methodical nature and deep respect for institutional responsibility, reportedly struggled with the implications. Allowing the truth to surface would not merely affect one individual, it risked reopening old wounds, reigniting public debate, and destabilizing already fragile family dynamics. Yet doing nothing posed a greater danger: the erosion of trust within the monarchy itself. Insiders describe a series of closed-door meetings marked by tension and careful language. Advisors presented timelines, documented discrepancies, and internal assessments that painted a picture increasingly difficult to ignore. What troubled the king most, sources say, was not just the content of what was revealed, but the realization that certain representations had influenced perception at the highest levels, both inside and outside the institution. That this was not about public image alone, it was about credibility. The monarchy survives on continuity, truth, and the quiet understanding that personal narratives do not override collective responsibility. When that balance is disrupted, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. And according to those familiar with the discussions, King Charles reached a point where maintaining silence would have signaled acceptance, something he was no longer willing to grant. The moment of exposure itself was not theatrical. There was no raised voice, no dramatic declaration. Instead, the truth unfolds as it often does within royal circles, calmly, precisely, and without spectacle. Information was acknowledged, assumptions were corrected, certain claims, long treated as unquestionable, were privately dismantled. For those present, the shift in atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. It was during this phase, sources say, that Meghan became visibly distressed, not because of confrontation, but because of realization. The understanding that certain narratives were no longer protected by silence reportedly created a pressure that was both emotional and physical. What followed was an abrupt halt, a moment that insiders describe as alarming, unexpected, and deeply unsettling. Medical assistance was reportedly summoned out of caution, not panic. Yet the symbolism of the moment was impossible to overlook. This was no longer a matter of strategy or optics. It was a human response to institutional consequence. The collision of personal narrative with royal accountability. What makes this development especially significant is the palace's response afterward. Rather than rushing to clarify or deny, officials adopted a rare posture of stillness. No immediate counterstatement, no rapid narrative control. This silence, according to royal observers, was deliberate. It signaled that the institution was no longer willing to shield or soften realities that had already been acknowledged internally. Behind closed doors, senior figures reportedly viewed this moment as a turning point, not a punishment, not a public reckoning, but a boundary, a line drawn quietly, indicating that certain distortions, intentional or otherwise, would no longer be absorbed by the institution in the name of peace. The implications are profound. When a monarchy chooses truth over convenience, it sends a message not just to the public, but to its own members. It establishes that duty is not conditional, and that emotional narratives cannot override collective responsibility. For King Charles, this decision appears rooted in legacy, a determination to protect the crown not through silence, but through clarity. As whispers continue and observers attempt to piece together what was exposed, one reality is becoming increasingly clear. This moment was not about collapse alone, it was about consequence, and once such a boundary is crossed, the institution cannot simply return to what it was before. What follows next, insiders warn, may reshape how the palace handles not just this situation, but every future challenge where personal story and royal truth collide. In the hours following the internal exposure, the palace entered a phase familiar only to those who have witnessed institutional crisis from the inside. It is a period defined not by panic, but by calculation. Silence becomes strategy, movement becomes minimal. Every word, every absence of a word, is weighed for consequence. According to insiders, this is exactly what unfolded after the king's decision reshaped the internal landscape. Senior advisors were reportedly instructed to suspend all non-essential communications. Scheduled briefings were quietly postponed. External engagements slowed. To the public, it appeared as nothing more than routine calm. Inside, however, a different reality took shape. One focused on containment, preparation, and long-term positioning. This was not about managing a headline. It was about protecting the institution from further erosion. What troubled palace officials most was not the immediate reaction, but the inevitability of what would follow. Once internal acknowledgement occurs, external pressure becomes only a matter of time. The monarchy understands this rhythm well, and yet, sources suggest this moment feels different. Unlike previous controversies, this one is not being addressed through denial or narrative redirection. Instead, it is being allowed to exist, quietly, firmly, and without correction. Observers note that this approach reflects a subtle but significant shift in leadership style. King Charles is not seeking confrontation, but he is also no longer willing to absorb misalignment in silence. The emphasis, sources say, has moved from preservation of comfort to preservation of credibility. That distinction changes everything. Within this recalibration, Prince Harry's position has become a point of intense internal consideration. While no official reassessment has been announced, advisors are reportedly examining how recent developments intersect with his long-standing grievances and public claims. The internal question is not one of blame, but of alignment. Where does he now stand in relation to an institution that has chosen clarity over accommodation? Those familiar with the discussions suggest Harry is being viewed through a more complex lens than before. On one hand, he remains a son, a brother, and a figure shaped by deep emotional experience. On the other, his public narrative has increasingly conflicted with the internal reality now being acknowledged. This tension has forced the palace to reconsider how much flexibility remains without undermining its own integrity. The silence surrounding Harry at this moment is particularly striking. No supportive statements, no quiet briefings, no symbolic gestures. For royal watchers, this absence speaks volumes. It suggests that the institution is pausing not to punish, but to reassess. And in royal terms, reassessment often precedes change. Behind the scenes, contingency planning is reportedly underway, not for immediate action, but for future inevitabilities. Advisors are said to be mapping scenarios, public inquiry, renewed media pressure, and potential personal responses. Each scenario is being evaluated not for emotional satisfaction, but for institutional consequence. This methodical approach underscores just how seriously the palace is treating the situation. What differentiates this moment from previous royal controversies is its tone. There is no urgency to control perception, no rush to reclaim narrative dominance. Instead, the palace appears prepared to let reality speak for itself. This restraint, observers argue, is intentional. By refusing to react impulsively, the monarchy positions itself as grounded, confident, and unshaken by external noise. Public perception is already beginning to shift. Commentators note a growing sense that the palace is no longer shielding individuals at the expense of the institution. This does not signal cruelty or detachment, but a reassertion of boundaries. The message, subtle but unmistakable, is that participation in the royal structure carries responsibility, and that responsibility cannot be overridden by personal storytelling. For King Charles, this phase represents a defining moment. His reign has often been characterized as cautious, transitional, and deeply conscious of legacy. By allowing truth to surface without amplification or suppression, he demonstrates a leadership style grounded in patience and principle. It is a form of authority that does not announce itself, but endures through consistency. As the palace prepares for what comes next, one reality becomes clear. This situation is no longer contained within family dynamics. It has evolved into an institutional reckoning, one that will influence how the monarchy engages with conflict, transparency, and internal accountability moving forward. And as silence continues to hold, the world waits, not for an explanation, but for the next unmistakable signal that something fundamental has shifted within the crown. As silence continued from the palace, the absence of denial became the loudest message of all. Media outlets around the world began to recalibrate their coverage, moving away from speculation toward analysis of what the palace was not doing. There were no counter-briefings, no corrective leaks, no familiar attempts to soften or redirect the narrative. For seasoned royal observers, this restraint signaled something unprecedented. The institution was prepared to let consequences unfold without interference. Public reaction intensified as details carefully framed as insider accounts circulated. Commentators emphasized that this was not a spectacle engineered for humiliation, but a structural response to internal misalignment. The focus shifted from personalities to principles. What does accountability look like inside a monarchy built on continuity? What happens when private narratives and institutional truth can no longer coexist? For Meghan, the moment marks a profound turning point. While no official statement addresses her condition or response, the gravity of the situation is unmistakable. Observers note that the pressure she faced was not derived from public accusation, but from the realization that internal protection had quietly expired. In royal terms, this represents a fundamental change. Silence, once a shield, had become a boundary. International media reaction has been notably cautious. Rather than amplifying sensational claims, many outlets are framing the situation as an institutional recalibration. This measured approach reflects an understanding that the palace's posture, still composed, unreactive, demands seriousness. The story is no longer about confrontation. It is about what happens when an institution chooses stability over accommodation. Public sentiment mirrors this shift. While opinions remain divided, there is growing acknowledgement that the monarchy appears to be asserting long-dormant limits. Sympathy and criticism coexist, but the dominant theme is recognition. This moment feels different from all that came before. Previous controversies were met with counter-narratives, emotional appeals, or prolonged ambiguity. This time, the response is clarity through restraint. For Meghan, the future now appears uncertain in a way it has not before, not because of punishment or exclusion, but because the framework around her has changed. Royal association without alignment is no longer being sustained by silence. Observers suggest this may compel a reassessment of how she positions herself moving forward, whether through recalibrated messaging, distance, or a quieter public presence. Prince Harry's role in this evolving landscape remains complex. While he has not been directly addressed, the implications for him are significant. The institution's choice to prioritize truth over narrative inevitably reframes his long-standing claims. It does not negate his experiences, but it places them within a broader context, now defined by internal acknowledgement rather than external assertion. This recalibration may influence how his voice is received, both within royal circles and by the public. What emerges most clearly is a shift in royal boundaries. The palace has signaled that emotional narratives, however compelling, do not supersede institutional responsibility. This is not an act of coldness, but of definition. The monarchy is reminding all associated with it that participation carries limits, expectations, and accountability that cannot be endlessly negotiated. For King Charles, the long-term implications may define his reign more than any single policy or ceremonial change. By allowing truth to stand without amplification or suppression, he demonstrates a form of leadership rooted in endurance rather than reaction. It is a quiet assertion of authority, one that trusts time, consistency, and structure over spectacle. As global attention remains fixed on the palace, one reality becomes undeniable. The monarchy has crossed a threshold. The era of absorbing internal conflict through silence appears to be ending. In its place stands a more clearly defined institution, one that acknowledges humanity, but is no longer willing to compromise its foundation for the sake of comfort. This moment will not be resolved quickly. Its effects will unfold gradually, shaping relationships, public perception, and future decisions. But one thing is already clear to observers on all sides: the balance has shifted. And once such a shift occurs within an institution built on continuity, it does not easily reverse. In the end, this story is not about collapse alone. It is about consequence, boundary, and transformation. The palace has spoken, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. And in royal history, it is often the quiet moments that change everything. What has become increasingly clear in the aftermath of this unfolding crisis is that the palace is no longer operating in repair mode. This is not about calming tensions, restoring optics, or mending fractured narratives. According to insiders, a permanent line has now been drawn, one that fundamentally alters how the institution engages with internal controversy and personal grievance. Senior royal aides are said to be treating this moment as a reset, not a reset of relationships, but of standards. For years, the monarchy absorbed pressure quietly, believing patience and silence would eventually neutralize disruption. That approach, sources say, has reached its limit. The recent exposure did not force the palace to act emotionally, it forced it to clarify where loyalty to the crown ends and personal narrative begins. King Charles, whose leadership has often been described as cautious and introspective, is now being viewed as resolute in a way rarely seen before. This is not a show of authority meant for headlines. It is authority exercised through stillness. Those close to the king suggest he believes the monarchy can no longer afford ambiguity when trust and truth are involved. Once credibility is compromised, even quietly, it threatens the foundation of the institution. For Meghan, this marks a decisive shift. Royal insiders stress that there has been no formal rebuke, no public condemnation, and no personal retaliation. Instead, something more consequential has occurred: institutional disengagement. The protection once provided by silence is no longer guaranteed. Without that shield, every future claim, appearance, or implication will stand on its own, unaided by royal restraint. This change does not signal exile, but it does signal distance. Observers note that distance, in royal terms, often speaks louder than rejection. The palace is not moving toward confrontation. It is moving away from accommodation. That distinction matters. It reframes the narrative from conflict to consequence, a shift that cannot easily be undone. Prince Harry's situation has become increasingly complex as a result. While he remains personally connected to the family, the institution now appears to be separating emotional bonds from operational alignment. Insiders say this distinction is deliberate. The monarchy is making clear that family relationships do not automatically extend to institutional endorsement. Sympathy may exist privately, but public alignment now requires consistency with internal truth. The public response continues to evolve. Rather than explosive outrage, there is a growing sense of sobering realization. Many observers are beginning to understand that the palace's silence is not avoidance, it is finality. When the monarchy stops responding, it often means the matter has moved beyond debate. The narrative is no longer being negotiated. International reaction mirrors this tone. Foreign press coverage has shifted away from sensational framing and toward long-term implications. Analysts are asking not what will happen next week, but what this moment signals for the future of royal governance. The consensus is emerging. The monarchy is reasserting its boundaries in a modern context, choosing clarity over comfort, Within the palace, advisors are reportedly focused on future-proofing the institution.